Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of ParaTalk, and on this episode of ParaTalk we've got something a bit weird. We're going to be talking about haunted dolls, and it's not just me. I've got a guest, and I've got a guest who has actually written a book on it. So without further ado, let me bring in my guest and we'll get this show on the road. Hi Fiona, welcome to ParaTalk.
Hello, hi, thanks for having me on.
That's all right, no problem. So, as I just explained, you have written a book about haunted dolls, or a cursed collection of haunted dolls. But before we run ahead and start talking about all things weird and haunted, where does your background come from with the paranormal?
Well, way back when I was a child, my fascination began with the paranormal in general. I loved reading, like, you know, those sort of like cheap little books, A to Z of ghosts, and, you know, sort of all those kind of collections that were out there, and ghost stories, things like that.
Yeah.
And I just became really fascinated by the subjects, like, in general. And then as I got a little bit older, sort of my teenage years, I sort of took it a bit more seriously. I began sort of researching and looking into like some really well-known cases that were out there. And eventually I started going on like paranormal investigations and studying the subject. Like, I've studied exorcism and applied paranormal research, theology, and I just kind of really threw myself into it. But the one aspect of the paranormal that really gripped me and that kind of really kind of stuck with me really was the whole idea of an object being haunted. And then as I was looking into the subject, I realised there wasn't actually that much out there really. There's a whole wealth of material on haunted houses and poltergeists and demonic possession, but there was very little out there on haunted objects and haunted dolls. So I thought that I was going to take that on. I thought I'm going to throw myself into it, dive down the rabbit hole, and just really kind of study it from all angles and see where that takes me. So, and the end result of that was me putting the book together, A Cursed Collection of Haunted Dolls, which has just recently been released.
So I'm wondering, if you're going to do a book, and you're going to do a book on a particular subject, and this subject is something that it's there's a lot to it, and you've kind of got to do your research. So when you get pen to paper, before you even start typing anything, where do you start? I mean, what's step one when you think, right, I'm going to do about a book on haunted dolls. I'm going to cover all the subjects. I'm going to, write some stories about it, or I'm going to do some cases and stuff. Where do you actually start? What do you start with?
It's a big question, really. It sort of starts as a bit of a messy thing, really. Like, I get my notebooks out. I kind of have an agenda of what I want to write and how I want to present it, what my goal is. So it kind of started out with like messy notes in my notebook, sort of like, these are the cases I'd like to look into. These are the theories behind why and how objects can be haunted, and these are the people online who I've come across that have had experiences with them. And it was just a case of like me building almost like a bullet point kind of thing, piece by piece, that this is what I want to cover, this is what the outcome I want to be. And it's just kind of was working through that and then building it up over time. And then I spent a lot of time as well reaching out to people, because, I thought there's no better way to understand the subject than actually kind of picking the brains of people who have had direct experiences. So, fortunately, I had some great input from people. Like, I was able to interview Patty Negri from Ghost Adventures, and Jane Harris, because she was involved with Peggy the Doll, and Jane Harris is from Help My House is Haunted. And there was a lady called Carrie Bergen from a documentary called A Haunting in Blue Hill, I think it was called. And I just kind of reached out to these people, and they were really good with their time and gave me their time, and they kind of really shared their insights and experiences. And so, it kind of just built up from there, really, sort of notes about individual cases, input from other people through interviews, and it kind of built up over time. And then I'd go back and I would add more and more as I learned more, if that makes sense. So what started out as just a few pages kind of builds up over time, the more that I was able to learn.
When you're putting a book together and you're putting together a collection of cases about, a collection of haunted dolls from all different corners of the world, are you seeing any kind of connection? Not just with, I don't mean in the sense of, oh, it's a haunted doll and it's got a ghost in it or whatever. I mean, is there any other connection there where you look and think, oh, there's something weird going on here?
I think if anything, what struck me the most was how there often isn't anything in common with a lot of the cases. Like, you have this thing in your mind that, oh, if you're going to pick up a haunted doll, it's going to be a vintage doll from 130 years ago, and it's going to look creepy and all this sort. You have kind of like a psychological expectation, and part of that might be through film and Hollywood, and kind of the films we see about like killer dolls and haunted dolls. But if anything, the one thing that stood out to me is that each case can actually be really quite different, and what triggered off the haunting itself, and the kind of doll or object that it is, really seem to be quite individual in themselves, other than the fact, like you said, that they show symptoms of having some kind of energy there, and those can be similar. But, the backgrounds and the stories are really quite varied, which kind of is an interesting thing as you're looking into it.
So what was the one case that kind of inspired you to sort of build a whole book around this phenomenon?
Well, growing up, obviously I knew all about the Annabelle doll, as I'm sure, most people have heard of Annabelle. And so that story was in the back of my mind. I always found it interesting. But I think it was around 2015. That's when it became a more significant thing to me. And that was with the Peggy the Doll case. And I think what I found interesting about that was you didn't just have the account of the doll itself being haunted from one person's perspective. Peggy actually was affecting people that saw her, that read about her, that even saw her photograph. It seemed quite a far-reaching case. And that was just something that really kind of stuck with me, because I thought, well, hang on, you've got a doll that's supposed to be haunted. People have seen and witnessed things and experienced things, but there are people that even experienced feeling ill and, feeling like they experienced something negative, even just from seeing her photograph on newspapers, because she made quite a lot of headlines at the time. It was quite a big case. And that just kind of really was something that I thought, wow, this is fascinating. There's Annabelle in the 70s, and it kind of felt like that was the only doll that was out there in terms of such a big story. And suddenly Peggy landed sort of 10 years ago, and that was something that just planted a seed in my mind. And then it kind of, my interest sort of took a deeper turn from there, really.
So we've got haunted dolls, and we've got haunted objects, and we've got haunted places and haunted houses. Do you think that in some way that there is an overruling connection with this phenomenon, with the paranormal, in a sense where, whatever's haunting a house could be haunting a doll, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of the thing that drove me to kind of explore the subject more, really, because I was thinking, you come across a lot of people that are open-minded about ghosts and haunted houses and haunted land and things like that. And we just have this whole host of books and shows that are about haunted homes, things like that. And I was thinking, but when you break it down to its basics, a haunted house, a house is just bricks built on land. It's not something, massively different to an object, other than the object is a smaller item, perhaps. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if a house can be haunted, or a hotel room, then why can't a doll possibly, or an antique, or a family heirloom, or something that have some kind of energy attached, whether that be residual, or whether that there's kind of like a spirit attachment to it. If a room can have a ghost, for example, then why would an object that was perhaps much loved during someone's life not retain some kind of energy? And that's what really drove me to sort of find answers on that.
So you have had some personal experience with the haunted doll phenomenon, haven't you? Whilst you were doing research for your book, can you tell the listeners a little bit about how that came about and what you experienced?
Yeah, so when I started writing the book, it was purely going to be me pulling together all the research I could from other people's experiences, because I hadn't had that insight myself. I'd never had what I considered to be a haunted object before. So the book itself, to me, when I started it, was going to be just a collection of other people's experiences along with my research. But at some point during that time, I reached out to Rob, who hosts the How Haunted podcast, and he had done I think it was a 2-part special on a haunted doll called Edna. So Rob was quite a skeptic himself, but just as an experiment to see if anything would happen, he recorded himself in a room with the doll, and just to see if anything would occur. And by the end of his recordings, he kind of felt like there was actually something there and attached to Edna the doll, because of some of the captures that he had on EVP and audio recordings. And basically, as I reached out to Rob, he said, look, I've got this doll. She's called Edna. Wouldn't it be amazing if I sent her to you and you can just see firsthand if you experienced anything, and it would be good insight while you're writing the book? And I thought, well, that's perfect, because, what better way for me to understand than perhaps experience it myself. So I kind of went into it with an open mind, really. I wasn't sure what to expect. Part of me was thinking possibly nothing, nothing might come of it. But Rob sent me the doll, and there has been and there continues to be unusual things around Edna. But when I received her and I first opened the package, I sat her on the sofa, and sort of over that period of the first hour or two, when I left her where she was sitting, I just had like the stereotypical feeling that people describe when they feel a presence of that cold feeling, that almost goosebumps, that kind of really cold, tingly feeling. And that lasted for quite a long time. And I at first I thought, well, that could be in my mind. So, I'm half expecting this doll to have something. So you kind of just jot it down and make a note of it and just see what else happens. But over time, I did kind of really build a good catalogue of experiences, which I noted down and wrote about in the book. And that includes that some EVP captures where I asked Edna, how old is she? And there was a childlike voice that you could hear saying 6. And it was quiet, but it was distinctive enough you could hear the number in response. And there was a few other captures on EVP too, including what sounded like her calling my name, saying Fiona, in the same sounding voice as who had said the number 6. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I tried to do other experiments. I tried to do sort of like tried to use some gadgets as well. So I used my EMF meter. I've never really known what I thought about that, but I thought if you're going to document something that's supposed to be haunted, then come at it from all angles. So there was a few times where I'd put the EMF meter on the doll and it would just go crazy, and then I would move it away and then it would suddenly stop. But the most interesting to me, and I don't know if you're familiar, but a lot of paranormal investigators now use these things. They're light sensors, little balls, basically. And they're just like quite small balls, and they only light up if you touch or push them. So basically they're touch sensitive. So I purchased one for that purpose, really, and I put this little ball on the doll, and I had quite a few occasions, and still do now, I still do it regularly, where I would say to Edna, if you're there right now and you're listening and you're able to, can you light the ball, or can you touch the ball? And it would come on just like that. And there was a few times where I had that experience where it would almost be an immediate response, and then it would stop, and then I would ask again and the light would go off again. So that was quite interesting. I mean, it's quite unnerving because I keep the dolls that I have in my bedroom, and one of the interesting things was falling asleep and then waking up at 3 a.m. and seeing the light flashing. And obviously it's only a small ball, but when you're half asleep and your bedroom is completely pitch black, and all of a sudden you got the ball flashing, and it was sitting on Edna, and that was quite unnerving because it just felt like that had come out of nowhere, you know. But then, you know, my husband, he is a skeptic. He's always been a bit more on the fence of being a bit unsure about this whole thing. And he had a couple of times, as did I, where since having Edna, there was that sort of darting movement in the house, you know, where you catch that movement from the corner of your eye, and you
that kind of shadowy, that kind of shadowy figure,
absolutely, like a fleeting movement. So I had that a couple of times myself, but the most interesting thing was to have my husband say, you know, this has happened. I saw something that, to the point where he got up from where he was sitting and looked around the house because he was that convinced that something must have come in and gone past the doorway. So, you know, when you're hearing it from him as well, to me, that kind of, you know, validated that there was something going on.
Have you got any animals, any pets?
No.
Okay.
No.
I was just wondering if you'd also, when you brought the doll home and you put the doll where it lives now, if you maybe have had any friends around it and not told them that you've got this haunted doll, and they might have said, well, it feels a bit weird in here, it feels like being watched or whatever. You ever any people come over and said stuff and not known that you've had this doll in your home?
I haven't had people around that aren't aware of, if that makes sense. Like, there's that level of knowledge there with some of the people that know, you know, that knew quite a lot. So it's hard to make that separate then, because, you know, as you know, you kind of have people, they might be aware of a few things, and then psychologically they're kind of primed to make that connection. So I haven't really, but I do have a friend that I'm quite close to, and she's quite as sensitive, like she picks up on things, and she did say that she'd felt like there was something around Edna, and Patti Negri herself did a reading and felt that there too was a child spirit attached, which was interesting because I'd heard the word 6 on the EVP that I'd done. So, you know, I've just kind of made little notes and collections of little things that have happened, like I said, the cold spots and the balls lighting up and the EVPs and all these sort of things, and tried to build up a little list of things that had happened, and then presented it in the book. And then that's kind of like up to other people to decide then whether they think there's something to that or not. You know, it's not, you're never going to kind of like convince somebody completely. All you can do is present what you know and what you've found, and then kind of leave that to other people to interpret that.
I was going to ask you regarding your experiences, and obviously you be keeping notes on them. It would be interesting, and I'll say you kind of did mention this, that if you took the doll to somebody who was obviously who's got some sort of medium skills or psychic skills, and did a reading and see if they gave you the same information as the information that you had already, that would be interesting.
It would. I agree, actually. And it's something that someone else suggested recently, to do the same, to kind of give to somebody the doll without any information, and to just see if there's a match there. But because I'm not personally as sensitive, I don't have any gifts in that way. Everything I kind of come across in my experience is an experience that anyone else can have, if that makes sense. So it's not, I can't claim, oh, well, then I sense this about this doll or anything. All I do is kind of go by what I'm seeing and what I've kind of come up with through my experiments and my EVPs and things like that, kind of documented it to the best of my ability, really.
When I think of like haunted objects, haunted doll, many haunted dolls have got this kind of spooky thing, because obviously you look at them, there's like a little person. It's like a little person there looking at you. Have you ever got to a point where you're doing this research and you're having these things in your home, you're thinking, this is all getting a bit scary now, I'm starting to get a bit concerned about stuff?
A couple of the experience I had creeped me out a bit, and like just learning about some of the cases themselves and reading about how people had bad luck and negative experiences from like Peggy the doll and even Robert the doll. He's in a museum, and yet people say they visit him in the museum and have had bad luck since seeing him. You sort of read these things and you're thinking, what if I'm kind of unwittingly inviting the attention of some of this energy, or that I'm going to bring something back on myself. And I did wonder that, even with Edna the doll. I mean, she was supposed to be like a 6-year-old child, but at the same time, you always have that voice in the back of your head thinking, well, something that's a bit more sinister would say that also. There is always an element where these things play on your mind, and you do wonder, kind of playing with fire a bit, because quite a lot of these stories you read about haunted dolls do seem to have a bit of a negative connotation, don't they?
Yeah.
And that does play in the back of my head. And my publisher took it seriously enough that we discussed having photos of the dolls in the book, such as Robert and Peggy and Annabelle. And in the end, we opted not to use real photos of them and to use illustrations, because of the amount of people online that say that these dolls do have the capacity to bring negative energy to people. And, we thought, well, why risk playing with fire? So we didn't even use the photos for that reason. We actually put a disclaimer at the beginning of the book about why we use drawings and illustrations instead of actual photos. So it is something that was in my mind, definitely.
Well, I'm going to jump ahead to 2025 and lay this on you, just get some of your thoughts. You might not even have paid attention to this, because I have only recently learned of this, and I've been doing a little bit of looking into it. Are you familiar with the whole craze at the moment with the Labubu dolls?
Yeah, I am.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting because it didn't seem to take long, really. They become a craze. Like, it seemed like overnight. You saw them on the internet everywhere, these Labubu dolls, and they looked cute, and it seemed like everyone wanted to collect them, and kids were going mad for them. And then it just seemed like overnight you started to hear these stories, they're cursed, or they're based on the demon Pazuzu. I think it was, people were saying that there's some kind of demonic influence to them. And then you had people on TikTok saying, oh yeah, I own one or two of them, and I'm pretty sure that there's something about them that's not right, doesn't feel right. And this did seem to be a big thing. And it reminded me in a way of like the craze of the Furbies, I think it was in the 90s.
Furbies, yeah.
That's it, yeah. And people kind of went the same way with that. It was like there was a craze, everyone wanted one, they sold out in the shops everywhere, they became hugely collectible, and all of a sudden people were like, oh, I think they've got a mind of their own, and they seem really sinister. And and there's just something about these toys, I think, and there doesn't necessarily appear to be an actual root cause between why we seem to become a bit suspicious about them. I spent quite a bit of time trying to read about Labubus, and I could find people talking about how it appears to be inspired by Pazuzu the demon and bad experiences, but I could never understand or find the source for how that came about.
Yeah, in internet, kind of internet lore and internet legend, and you have a few influencers that say something, and they've got maybe a few 100,000 or a few million followers, and they have a doll, and they say that I think there's it's got a ghost in it or whatever, and then of course that kind of snowballs, and then maybe somebody has a weird experience, and they correlate that with a connection with this little doll thing. Because if you think about it, right, you just touched on it just then with the Furby thing. I mean, I'm a bit of an old boy, but I go back to the 80s, where I can remember the Cabbage Patch dolls. They were mental, and you had before that you had the Chickaboos. The little Chickaboo dolls, the little monkey things, and people were going crazy for those and buying them, and every kid had to have one. And it's kind of like, if you think about it, right, You think I'm kind of going to just go way off scale here, but if you think about it, if there's something out there that is basically a phenomenon, it's everybody wants it, all the kids want it. Maybe in some way that in itself is creating the phenomenon. Do you not think so?
Yeah, there could be something to that. What you've said interests me actually, because I was speaking to somebody a few days ago about there was a bit of a craze a few years ago about reborn dolls. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Creepy. They're just way creepy. Those things are too real.
They do look very real, you know, there was just a bit of a kind of a popularity wave a few years ago with them, and they're made by artists. Like they're basically baby dolls, but made to be eerily lifelike. They really do look like real babies. And the interesting thing is, I was discussing this with a friend, and we wondered, is all that kind of maternal energy, you know, people use these dolls as therapy dolls, and people who have lost children kind of have bought reborn dolls for therapy purposes, or just in honor of a baby they've lost, or even just as a collector's item. And there's a lot of love, maternal feeling, and perhaps even like an energy or personality that you kind of project. And you do have to wonder, are we creating these things? Is there kind of like an energy that's drawn to that, and then it kind of grows, if that makes sense, you know? And I do wonder if in a few years' time will we actually be hearing about reborn dolls that are haunted because people are buying these things, and often there are emotional reasons behind them as well.
With this kind of stuff, I'm kind of on the fence, 50-50. I've got no reason to say that it's not true or people don't have experiences, because I haven't got all the facts. I only know what I read and what I learn from other people that have had experiences and stuff, and then I have my own opinions and thoughts on what it might be. But put it this way, right? You get a group of people, right? You get 12 people, you put them in a room, okay, and then they got like little doll in the middle, like little fluffy little doll, lovely little doll, and then you say to them, oh, by the way, there's a little I'll tell you a little backstory on this doll, what happened, and then I tell you some gruesome story of what it happened, and the family, the house burned down, and that was the only thing that was left, or whatever. And then you're all in the room, and you're all talking amongst yourselves, thinking, oh, maybe this, maybe that, maybe this. Or as you're talking about it, and as you're giving it, you're giving the story credence, maybe in some way you're unconsciously conjuring this kind of entity, this personality into being. And then it's like the experiment they did a long time ago, not a long time ago, back in the, I think it was 70s, when they
70s,
when they created the spirit, they created a ghost and they gave it a personality, and of course they all came through when they did their sit-ins and with information that they basically were writing out. And it's kind of like in the subconscious way, maybe, like you say, in some sort of maternal, which is quite a strong thing. An emotional bond is very strong, and it's it can't be broken. And so maybe in some way, if people are emotionally connected to these little, I mean, if you think about it, right? You think about it. I had a mate, right, years ago when I was a wee little nipper. I had a mate who had a blanket, and that blanket went everywhere with him. It was a comfort blanket, and he would. I mean, we were only little kids. I wasn't like 14 or anything. That would have been a bit weird. But I mean, I was like a little kid. Like I think maybe I just started school, so I don't know, 5-6 years old, something like that. But yeah, I had a mate who had it was like a grey blanket, and he just carried it around everywhere, and it was just like. He just like wore it like a cape, and it was like he would literally go. If you took it off of him, he would literally go mental. So I'm wondering if you had that kind of connection with like a little doll or something. Maybe in some way you are kind of giving it the energy, and if there's like a personality floating around, and he thinks, oh, I can attach myself to that because it's got some sort of emotional connection, and then I can live in there. That's going to become my house. So I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just throwing stuff. I tend to go off on tangents, but I'm just wondering.
I think it's a good point though that you raise, and I think it could work on either side. Whether it's that somebody is kind of unintentionally creating that energy by what they believe about the item, or whether it's that there is an energy around that is seeing what's going on and is interested in linking in with that. Whether it be because they like that there's that emotional attachment with the object and they think they can kind of harness something from that. It could very well work both ways though, and it's interesting, because the end results could be still the same, where you feel like you're living with something that's giving off some kind of paranormal energy. It's fascinating.
In your book, do you cover any of we're talking about modern day stuff here, but would we go back to sort of the olden days, like ye olde times, when people would put curses on everybody because they didn't like people? I curse your chickens and they'll all die or whatever. Were there like cases where people would curse, objects like, dolls and stuff, and then go, oh, here's a gift. You can have like a voodoo doll, but in like a cursed little doll. Here's a gift. It's got a devil in it now, and you can have it.
I did write like a few pages about how dolls were used, like in voodoo and ritualistic purposes, and the history of the dolls as well. Like, we've had dolls that were found as early as 2000 BC and in ancient Egyptian tombs, and we found evidence of them in ritual purposes and religious rites. For instance, in ancient Greece, like brides would offer a doll to the gods as a symbol for like blessing and protection upon their marriage as a woman as she was getting married. So there is a lot of like historical background. I did look into voodoo and the way that kind of there was a portrayal, isn't there, really, of that they were used to curse people. But interestingly enough, it's not as kind of commonplace as you think. I mean, there is evidence of dolls being used to contact spirits, almost like they're being used as a vessel and an aid to kind of contact the spirit world using dolls. But the whole idea of like cursing and sticking pins to hurt someone is more of a smaller part of it that kind of Hollywood adopted and that we kind of run with. I did look back as far, it's harder to kind of get details of really old stories. But obviously, even like, I know it's a popular case. I know that your listeners will know, but, Robert the doll, I mean, that kind of touches upon almost like a curse in a way, isn't it? Because the doll was given by a maid to a family. Child of the family took the doll and soon became convinced that something negative was associated with Robert. They felt that the doll was kind of moving and communicating with the child, and in the end, as you know, that like Robert's in a museum now, and even now like people will visit him and end up saying that they feel like bad things are happening, and they're even sending letters into the museum. Even now in 2025, the museum receives letters saying, can you please tell Robert we're sorry, please lift this negative energy off us. So that's particularly fascinating to me, that a case that goes way back is still having kind of like reverberations now in 2025.
Yeah, that's
fascinating to me.
Yeah, I that's one point that I do that I scratch my head up about, is when you with like the Robert the doll phenomenon, where people have gone to view the doll and then have come away and then had a run of real bad luck, and they've then said something funny. Oh, it's just a doll. Look at it, it's stupid. And then they've come away, and then suddenly their car breaks, and then their pipes burst in their house, and things that just don't normally happen one after another. And then you think you've got to go back now, and you've got to go see Robert, and you've got to say I'm sorry, and make your peace, and tell him he was right, and then it'll all be fine. But and it's you're taking something away. So there is something. I mean, there's something there that you're taking away with you. It's following you, and you could live hundreds of miles away, and it's still going with you. And then there's that omnipresent thing. It's like it's there everywhere. Wherever you go, it's there. So it's that fascinates me. That kind of fascinates. But before we end out this episode, I've got a couple more questions, and I just wanted to ask you with your book. And it's just come out, hasn't it? You just released it recently, haven't you? Yeah,
it's available now. Yeah, it's just recently been released.
What are the main topics that you're covering in your book?
There's a few sections in the book. The first half of the book is about how objects like dolls can become haunted, and then it looks at a whole series of cases that have been, like I've studied them and written about these cases in the book. And then there's a whole section of interviews, as I mentioned earlier on, with people who have experience of this, including, like Patti Negri and Jane Harris, and people that, from every walk of life, really, also that reached out to me, and I included interviews with them because I felt like their insight was really valuable to kind of build a picture of the reality of the subject, really. And then there's a part 2 of the book, which is only a small section actually of the book, but it concentrates on Hollywood and books and how the whole theme of haunted and cursed dolls has been kind of adopted in the entertainment industry. And so I take kind of like a fun look at, like franchises like Chucky and Dolly Dearest, and even films as far back as the 1920s, like films and things that have used dolls and as part of the storyline. I did some interviews for that as well, like Jennifer Tilly from Child's Play, who voices Tiffany the doll. She was interviewed for it. And Don Mancini, the director and writer of Child's Play, he was interviewed for it too. So there's just a fun section at the back, really, that just kind of like delves into Hollywood and literature that have used haunted dolls and where that influence comes from.
Has your thoughts on the haunted doll phenomenon, has it grown, or have you become a little bit more skeptical?
In terms of like skepticism, I think I always try to hold on to a healthy level of skepticism, because I think you have to, because there are so many people out there who will just run with a story or want to take advantage, or you've always got to have that healthy dose, haven't you, of skepticism. And I always do. From my perspective, if I'm honest, I think it's a real thing that happens. I do think something like a doll or an antique or a piece of jewelry, I do think items can be as haunted as a house can be haunted. But I think you have to just take each case as on an individual basis and then kind of draw your own conclusions. Like I did, you spend your time reading about them, and you're obviously going to have more cases that feel they're more validated or had more witnesses, or ones that make you think, oh, there's not, I don't get quite as convinced by this case. And that's the same for anyone, but it's the same as even a book about haunted houses. There are going to be cases that feel like they've got a ring of something there. And I think what I'd say to anyone is just kind of like keeping that healthy skepticism, but more importantly, like an open mind, and just letting kind of like the story and the account and the evidence that's out there guide you more than anything.
Yeah, I kind of on the fence with you there was as well. It's kind of, I'm not going to say it's not a true thing, and people are not experiencing what they're experiencing, because I wasn't there. But I do think that the phenomenon itself there's something going on. What that might be, I have no idea. But like other paranormal phenomenon and unexplained stuff, we don't really know. We only know what we know, and we have to take what people tell us and what they experience, and you just have to listen and draw up your own conclusions. So before we end this episode, where can people get hold of this book? Because that's the most important thing.
Yeah, so you can order the book online. It's called A Cursed Collection of Haunted Dolls, and you'd be able to find it on the usual online places, like Amazon will have a stock of the book. But it'll also, a lot of mainstream bookstores will either stock it or be able to get it in for you. I know Waterstones and WH Smith and the high street stores are able to either stock or order in for you as well. So it's widely available, and it's out on paperback and Kindle as well.
Awesome. Kindle, that's what I like to hear. Bit of a fan of Kindle. I've got quite a large library of paranormal books, and it's so nice to be able to get my Kindle and go, oh, there's a book I want. I'm just going to download it to my Kindle, and I'm saving all that space. Yeah, it's there, and it remembers where I am, because I'm one of these readers, right? Well, I've got friends that read books, and they'll sit down and they'll literally read a book from cover to cover in like 2 days. I can't do that. I just can't do. I have to pick at it like I'm eating my favorite food, and just make it savor it, and a few pages at a time, maybe a chapter a week. Make it last, because once it's gone, it's gone.
Exactly. Yeah. If there's a book I'm particularly enjoying, I do like sort of taking my time and dipping in, dipping out, because you almost don't want it to finish, do you? So. Yeah,
that's right. And it's also nice to download books to Kindle that I remember as a kid. So there's like ghost books I remember as a kid that when I was a kid, I didn't really understand what I was reading. I would just read it and think, oh, that's a big, and then forget it. And then of course you go back now and you reread it, and you're completely different. It's like it's like. It's like TV shows like Children of the Stones, one of the greatest TV shows, kids' TV shows there ever was. When I was a kid, I didn't really understand what I was watching. It was just like creepy. But now, rewatch it, as an old boy, I get it. You know,
You see
but
it completely differently, don't you?
I still don't understand a thing about what's going on with Sapphire and Steel. It still goes way over my head, that TV series. Way over my head, but I still got the box set, but never mind. Anyway, Fiona, thanks very much for joining me on ParaTalk. Fascinating conversation all about haunted dolls. And as I say, the links to your book will be in the show notes. Have you got any final words before we close out this episode?
Just that I hope, you know, if any of your listeners do dive into the book, just that I hope that they enjoy it. I've put in as much information as I can on many of the haunted doll cases. Some of them well known and others are not so much. You know, I kind of have included as much as possible. So I just, you know, it'd be interesting to see what your listeners think if they give it a go, see where they lie in terms of believer or skeptic on the cases. And if anyone wants to reach out to me on social media, because I'm constantly collecting cases of haunted objects as well as haunted dolls. And, you know, I'd love to hear from anyone. If anyone out there has experience of this or feels like they own a haunted item, you know, I am on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram. And I would love to hear from people if they want to reach out and let me know about their own stories. That would be great too.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Fiona. Thanks for joining me. As I say, fascinating interview. Thanks to everybody to listening to this episode. And as I say, give Fiona your feedback. And if you read the book, and I'm sure Fiona will be back in in a little while, maybe a few months, and we'll do a catch up and see how things are going with her haunted doll episodes and her sort of her experience with her book and see how that's going. Will there be another book in the works, by the way, if this one gets gets the thumbs up?
Yeah, I mean, I've started writing a second book. It's at very early stages, so I can't sort of say that it's going to be 100% out there, but I have started working on a book on cursed and haunted items in general. So,
cool.
Because during my research of haunted dolls, obviously constantly coming up with other things like other haunted objects, and in the end, I ended up thinking there's such a great amount of material there on other objects and stuff and curses as well. I thought I've got to start collecting that, and I've started to putting together a second book. So hopefully, if that continues to go well, that might see the light of day at some point as well.
Well, thanks again, and thanks to everybody for listening. And until the next episode, talk to you soon.